Hello, thank you for joining us on ILTV's weekly edition of One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz, a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Each week, you have the chance to get your questions answered by one of America's greatest legal minds. Professor Dershowitz joins us now from Martha's Vineyard. Hello there.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. Let's bring in our first guest question. It's from Rebecca Gerger, a student originally from North Carolina who lives in Israel and served as a combat soldier in the Israeli army. Take a listen to her question.
Shalom, Professor. Originally from Charlotte, North Carolina, I just finished my government studies here at IDC Herzliya, and of course I read your book, The Case for Israel. We're currently witnessing President Trump's bold decision to tear up the Iran deal and reimpose sanctions. His move is geared to undo a bad deal and restrict Iran's nuclear aspirations. However, the past bad deal failed to address in and of itself core aspects such as preventing Iran from developing missiles and gave it money to spread terrorism worldwide. So do these new sanctions have a chance at succeeding? And how would you compare these external threats to Israel to internal threats that Israel faces within its own society, such as issues in how to deal with the Palestinians and religious differences that pull this country apart while at the same time seem to cause a rift with world Jewry?
What a great question. I'm so glad to hear it from you, who came from America and are doing such good things in Israel now. Of course, we all hope for the day when Israel can only have to confront its internal problems, which is serious. The religious issues in Israel are serious. The issues posed by the new law are serious ones. But right now, Israel has to concern itself with existential threats, which primarily consist of the influence of Iran. I don't think anybody doubts that Iran has as its goal the development of a nuclear arsenal. It also has as its goal the destruction of Israel, either through its nuclear weapons or through its surrogates in Lebanon and now Syria. So I was opposed to the Iran deal, and I do think that the imposition of new sanctions on Iran, which start just now, will help bring that country to the realization that it cannot both have a nuclear arsenal and a successful economy. It has to pick one or the other. And indeed, I think the message Israel has sent, that I think the Trump administration has underlined it, unlike the Obama administration, is that it can never develop a nuclear arsenal because Israel will not permit it to. Whatever it takes, Israel will stop it. Whether it takes assassinations or cyber efforts or an all-out war, no prime minister of Israel will accept a nuclear-armed Iran. So once Iran gets the message that it will never be able to develop a nuclear arsenal, I think then it will see reality that at least it should have some economic security, which it will never get while it's seeking to develop these weapons, and also while it is the world's greatest purveyor of terrorism and instability in the Middle East. So the Iranian people are very good people. They have more of a democratic instinct than most other Middle East countries. They crave a time when their religious leaders are something of the past, and when they can live as normal human beings without worrying about the religious police, without worrying about the economic situation. And I hope that in years to come, we will see a stable Iran giving up its nuclear ambitions and trying to restore its status as part of the international community. But to do that, it will have to give up terrorism, hegemony. It will have to give up Hezbollah, and it will have to stop posing threats to Israel, both from Iran itself and from Israel's northern border.
Professor Dershowitz, I want to pick up on something you said there about the economic situation. There are new American sanctions that follow the US withdrawal from the Iranian nuclear deal earlier this year. That was back in May. But the EU, the European Union, has vowed to remain committed to the agreement. Where does that leave the sanctions and any business dealings with the Islamic Republic?
It leaves the sanctions in a very strong position because the United States has sent an unequivocal message to businesses around the world. You have a choice. Deal with Iran or deal with America. Iran is one of the smallest economies in the world. America is the largest economy in the world. And the message is you can't deal with both economies. And so whatever the EU says, and I have no quarrel with them maintaining at least that part of the deal, which precludes Iran from centrifuges and right now developing nuclear weapons, even if it wants to keep that part of the deal, fine. But its economic part of the deal will have little impact in light of the U.S. sanctions, which are very, very tough. And just to get to the second part of the brilliant question that was asked to me before by the student from the IDC, when Israel has the luxury of dealing with its internal problems, it's going to have to do a great deal to remind its citizens that every citizen of Israel is equal, that Orthodox Jews have no greater status than conservative and Reform Jews, and that Jews have no greater status than Druze or Muslims or Christians. Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, built on the principle of equality for all of its citizens. Yes, Israel has the right to have Tikva and the flag and celebrate Jewish holidays as its holidays, in much the way the Christian world has Christianity and its flags and symbols and celebrates Christmas and Easter as national holidays. But that doesn't in any way permit anyone in Israel to treat any of its citizens less than equally. I wish the new nationality law had included reference to the basic laws that do assure equality. And I wish the critics of the law would look at the other basic laws that guarantee equality and read these laws in tandem. And that would make a lot of the criticism seem over the top and somewhat hypocritical.
All right, moving on now, let's introduce this week's first studio guest, Major General Reserve Eitan Dangot. General Dangot served as the coordinator of government activities in the territories, that's in Gaza and the West Bank, and as an advisor to 3 Israeli defense ministers. Today, he's a senior research fellow at the Begin Sadat Center. General Dangot, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
There have been reports emerging this week of a possible ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, of course, the rulers of the Gaza Strip. That's set to be brokered by Egypt. What do you think may be the terms of that truce?
It's a very, let's say, sensitive, and it's a we have to be aware that here the tactic events can influence or impact immediately what's going. Mm-hmm. So when we are talking about terms, it looks like that it's time to start something. And this is the point. I think that Israel used a very clever policy in this issue with a lot of patience, because we can use a strong arm against Hamas, but we have to think about the day after. And if we are coming exactly to the day after from now without fighting to opportunity with fighting, I think that the government, the Prime Minister, is quite clever that is waiting to use all the opportunities and to start. The problem is what it will be agreed for the beginning. And I think this is a very important point, because Israel demands for months, and I support this kind of Israeli policy, that every beginning will be with returning of the 2 Israelis bodies of the soldier that has been killed 4 years ago, and the 2 illegal prisoners in Gaza. The issue that Hamas is looking to achieve their achievements like was in Gilad Shalit agreement. Besides, there is a big and a huge problem between Hamas and the PA, according who will lead inside Gaza, and Abu Mazen is sitting on the back in waiting patiently and make a lot of difficulties. So the start, if the both sides will agree on like a ceasefire, arrangements we can call it, with then returning the bodies and the soldiers, I don't say when and how, the timing is depend of the negotiation. And on the other end, Israel gives some steps of returning if something happened. With the support of Egypt, we can look to the medium term and to the long term.
Professor Dershowitz, your response to this, and specifically, if I may, in regards to the potential release of Israeli citizens currently held in Gaza, and of course the bodies of fallen soldiers still to be returned, should these issues, these humanitarian issues, be included as part of any truce?
That's a great debate that's going on in Israel, and I'm strongly on the side of demanding the return of the bodies of Mr. Golden and the other soldier and the 2 Israeli citizens. I do think that you can't have normalcy and legitimacy while Hamas engages in continuing war crimes and holding on to the bodies of these two brave soldiers who were killed in violation of a ceasefire brokered by the international community. And these soldiers were victims of the breach of that ceasefire and the continuing breach that Hamas is engaged in by refusing even to tell the families the status of the bodies of their children is a continuing breach of humanitarian and international law. My colleague Erwin Cutler, the former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, has been taking the lead in trying to get the bodies returned. When I was in Qatar, I spoke to the Emir of Qatar and insisted that as a condition of his continuing to help with humanitarian efforts in Gaza, that he demand the return of these two bodies and two living human beings. And he said he would do his best. So far, that has not produced material results. But I do think that return of the bodies as part of the ceasefire is essential. And I hope the Israeli government will insist on that kind of linkage. And you just can't trust an entity to continue to abide by a ceasefire if it continues to violate international humanitarian law and the basic principles of due process and core humanity by not returning these bodies and these two individuals.
Let's take a brief moment to talk about the situation inside the Strip, inside the Gaza Strip. General Dangot, you were the former coordinator of the Palestinian territories. The UN saying the coastal enclave will be uninhabitable in 2 years' time, in just 2 years. Is that your assessment as well?
Yeah, I made this assessment in 2014 when I briefed to the new cabinet, the new government that was. I estimate that in a few years Gaza will be in a very difficult situation, humanitarian. It means as a human being from us towards Gaza, and especially under a terror entity. So the question is not a question, it's very clear. The answer is what Hamas, as a terror entity which is controlling 1.8 million people in Gaza, will have to do in order to give their people the opportunity to live. And first thing is security. Stop the fire, disarm yourself in stages. Israel is not coming, said immediately. On the other hand, stop slow steps by Israel and other moderate Arab countries. This is a junction of opportunity for Hamas. It depends on them. So if it goes, it will bring the change, not now, something like 2 to 4 years at least. We have to be very patient. And meantime, Israel, under some circumstances with Egypt, because, on my opinion, the main closure on Gaza is not from Israel. It's coming from Egypt. Opening Rafah corridor to Gaza, to Hamas, to go outside is much more important to them than to increase the opportunities in Kerem Shalom. So it has to be step by step. We have to get, not to give only, and we have to be very strong about this process. And I have to mention another point. The PA on the side, Abu Mazen, Hamas is waiting for the day after Abu Mazen. This is the opportunity for them to wait and to strengthen their power. On the other hand, we don't have to forget the West Bank. We have to continue with Israel to support the West Bank economy, its economy, and the loss of price for the people who are living there. They are voting by the legs in the last years how they are maneuvering the situation. I mean, the majority of the population, and we can do it. Unless always the last opportunity is fire, and as a military, we have to make all we can to prevent it. We have to look about, Professor Dershowitz knows much more better than me, the meaning of delegitimation to Israel under some circumstances in the international community. I think by this policy, we create to all opportunities in a smart way, with a lot of patience.
I want to pick up on something you said there. Much of Gaza's 1.8 million people rely heavily on a UN refugee and works agency known as UNRWA. US President Donald Trump has ordered a review and cuts of over 80% of the government's contribution to the UN agency, which provides humanitarian relief to millions of Palestinian refugees. This week reports that his senior advisor, Jared Kushner, has been trying to abolish the agency entirely. Professor Dershowitz, what do you make of the idea of disbanding UNRWA?
I think it's long overdue. I think it should have been disbanded years and years and years ago. There's no place in the United Nations or the international community for a refugee agency which deals with only one problem, a self-inflicted, a self-caused problem, and which exacerbates the problem. UNRWA consists in substantial part of Hamas sympathizers. They are part of the problem, not part of the solution. They have been part of the problem from the very beginning. And the international community has to realize that what is going on in Gaza is a self-inflicted wound. When Israel left Gaza 13 years ago or so, Gaza could have been the Singapore on the Mediterranean. It could have received massive aid. It did receive massive aid from Qatar and other countries. It could have built a wonderful community. Israel left behind some facilities, farming facilities that could have been used, but instead, Hamas overthrew the legitimate leaders, killed many of the members of the Palestinian Authority, established a terrorist state, took the money that was supposed to be used for humanitarian purposes and turned them into terror tunnels and rockets. So if, God forbid, Gaza becomes the humanitarian catastrophe the general says it might become in several years, the international community has to realize this is not Israel's fault. Israel is simply defending itself. The fault lies completely with Hamas, which is starving its people in order to feed its military goals. And those military goals have to change, and military means have to change if Gaza is to treat its 1.8 million people with the kind of dignity and decency that they deserve.
General Dangoth, what's your response to that? What would it mean on the ground for Gaza, for the 80% of the population who absolutely depend on international assistance, for example, emergency relief, education, healthcare, employment? What would that look like on the ground?
I think that in Gaza, this is the issue of the meaning of UNRWA, and I would like also to use this opportunity to ask a question, Professor Dershowitz, about a new mechanism under the United Nations decision of giving UNRWA a mandate till, I think, 21 or 20, to find a way that will absolutely will stop the activities of UNRWA in the West Bank. There is no necessary under the PA that UNRWA will be active there, and to find a new mechanism in Gaza, because the emptiness or the vacuum that will be in Gaza, and from the eyes of IDF and Israel, we don't want to return to Gaza to be responsible. So we had to find a new mechanism in Gaza, maybe under the United Nations umbrella, that will be something new, that will move slowly and will give the umbrella that needs to help a civil administration in Gaza to control. You have to think out of the box, not to quarrel with the United Nations, but using the law, but moving ahead UNRWA aside. I worked with the UNRWA. I know that in my time, 2012, 2014, there were anti-Israeli policy that were a part to create delegitimation to Israel with lies. They changed their view in somehow in Gaza in the last years under the United States policy that helped us a lot. And I think now is a time, it's opportunity to make this change. I don't know what to do in Lebanon or in Syria. I think this is the problem of the United Nations without talking about Palestinian refugees. But we are in opportunity to move UNRWA completely ahead from the West Bank and in Gaza to find a new mechanism that will be under law, work under the United Nations, and fulfill this task.
Okay, General Dangoth, thank you for your input. Professor, please, your last words on this issue.
I completely agree with that analysis. I think UNRWA has to be replaced, and we have to think out of the box, perhaps through the UN, perhaps, however, through multinational approaches with Egypt and Jordan and Qatar and the Emirates and the United States and others providing the aid. Remember that every other refugee problem in the world has been solved, and many, many were much worse. The Pakistan-India refugee problem, the problem from Sudetenland, the problems in other parts of the world were solved. UNRWA not only didn't solve the problem, its goal was to keep the problem unsolved. Its goal was to maintain a hostile refugee population, which is a festering saw against any peace process. So UNRWA is the problem, not the solution. Other refugee agencies have solved the problems because they wanted to. UNRWA doesn't want to solve the problem of refugees. It wants to maintain it, and it wants to maintain its status as a delegitimator of the nation state of the Jewish people.
Talking of the peace issue, Professor Dershowitz, do you think this is part of a wider U.S. effort to get the issue of Palestinian refugees off the table, off the negotiating table for any future peace with Israel? Is this a U.S. effort to do that?
It's impossible to get the refugee problem off the table. What is possible is to see it as part of a larger refugee problem. That is, the same number of Jews were made refugees from Arab lands and Muslim lands during the same period of time that refugees were created among Palestinians. So I think seeing the refugee problem in context and demanding that the only people who have the right to claim any refugee status are people who themselves, personally, individually, were forced to leave Israel. The number there is very, very small. But once you start figuring out everybody's cousin and aunts and fifth cousins and seventh cousins, you get to that ridiculous figure of many million people who would want to return en masse to Israel and deny its existence as the nation state of the Jewish people. So the refugee problem has to be dealt with purely as a humanitarian issue, not as a political issue.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. General Dangot, thank you so much for your input.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for this week's edition of One-on-One with Professor Alan Dershowitz. Thanks to Professor Dershowitz and to this week's guests. And thank you for watching. If you'd like to have your questions answered, log on to our Facebook page or take a look at our website, iltv.tv. Goodbye for now.